Okay, today, human evolution. You've probably heard this idea or notion or phrase before about a so-called missing link. This is a very complicated phrase, actually, more than so than you might imagine, because the phrase missing link refers to an idea that far predates Darwin and evolutionary thinking. It goes back to earlier centuries when people believed in what was called the great chain of being, in which they believed that the living world had been created by God in a way that was continuous and step-like. And indeed, some early illustrations of it show it as a set of steps leading up to heaven. And the idea was that the animate or living world had no gaps in it because creation was perfect, because it was created by a perfect God, a perfect creator. So the idea that there could be anything missing in this chain of being is ultimately behind the idea of a missing link. But when people talk about a missing link, of course, they're referring to more modern notions of evolutionary thinking. So let me give you a short answer to write on your slide next to the question mark. Is there a missing link? No. There's no such thing. Because the question, is there a missing link, misunderstands Darwinism. The idea is that there's some sort of evidential gap which separates humans from other species. But if you really understand Darwinism, there is no such thing as links. Every individual would be a link. Think about it. Think about your own ancestry. Not just back to your parents and your grandparents, but keep going back. Your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. Right? There is an unbroken link of reproduction, of physical reproduction from you to your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, right? There's no break in the chain, obviously. It's an impossibility. There must be. Not one of your ancestors just came out of smoke. No. So, evolutionarily, everything, every single animal and plant and other organism is a link. So the idea of missing links is a bit dodgy. Okay, that's my short answer. Oops. Okay, so going back to Darwin and the Victorian period, the surprising thing is, despite all the fuss about human beings and human origins, the Victorians had no fossil evidence. There were no fossil humans. Now, I did mention this in a very early lecture when I showed that wonderful diagram from the book by Buckland, which surveyed the geological record and how they knew about the fossil record and how species had appeared and disappeared over a huge period of time. And nowhere in that, I told you, I believe I stressed it, there were no human beings. There was no evidence of humans at all. Hence, there was no evidence at all for those who might have supported what by the early 19th century was considered the old-fashioned idea of reading the stories in Genesis literally, that there had been a great worldwide flood, because there were no humans in all of that mess of the fossil record. If everything had been jumbled up and killed at once, there should have been millions of humans and their stuff, tools, houses, or whatever. There was nothing from humans. So there was very little to go on. Decades later, for Darwin and his colleagues, who wanted to reconstruct the ancestry of humans, because anatomically, and in accordance with all the other species that they understood, human beings must have been descended from earlier things, but they didn't actually have any of them. The other problem with human beings is that we seem to be, and let's admit all of it, let's frankly admit this, human beings seem to be so different from every other thing, every other living thing. We're really different. We wear clothes. We have language. We do all sorts of bizarre things like browsing Facebook and other weird stuff that nothing else does. We're very different from other things on this planet, right? So this makes it very easy to believe that, well, we're not like everything else. We're not like the Java miners outside picking up your bits of rice that you didn't eat at your lunch. They're jumping around the tables. They have some completely different origin, or the plants or whatever outside. Humans seem so different. Whereas, let's say, if we were talking about the origins of a particular cute little squirrel that lives in Singapore, you would say, well, there's loads of squirrels. Not just that one. There's squirrels in every country. They're different species, but they're obviously squirrels. They're cute and they jump around and they sort of jerk that tail that funny little squirrel way. Right? So they're similar to other things. They seem very connected to other things in nature, but humans are different. There's nothing like us. Except for the primates. The primates, the lemurs, monkeys, and apes, they are a bit human-looking. So that's why we find them so interesting and sometimes comical. They're kind of spookily a bit human, but they're hairy and they don't talk and they don't browse Facebook or wear clothes. So it's quite easy to say, well, they're animals that are a bit human-looking, but they're not like us. So the separateness of humans is a big deal. But if you were to be like Darwin, very objective about this, and stand back and survey it, or try at least to be objective, and survey it from the outside, you would see that human beings, actually, you're not unique in that respect of being quite different from everything else. There are actually lots and lots of other species which don't have any close relatives, very, very close relatives, which aren't part of a large, bushy tree, a large family, but which seem to be isolated. But we're not objective. We're just people. So we tend to see ourselves as very separate and different from everything else. But this will be explained as we go on. Now, the earliest ideas, far predating Darwin and the evolutionists, of course, was that great chain of being and other philosophies and ideas and mythologies that usually had human beings as sort of the peak or pinnacle of creation, as the highest point, as the greatest thing that's been created. And everything else was less, was lower, as you went down. Human beings were at the top. Well, you should not be surprised. Indeed, you should expect that as much older thinking gets carried on to newer thinking as can possibly be managed. That is how we work. So when evolutionary thinking began, loads of old ideas and thinking kept on going. And that was one. The idea of human beings being at the top, being the pinnacle, being the ultimate thing. And you see that in drawings, and it's a shame to pick on the German naturalist Ernst Haeckel, but he was a wonderful artist, and he drew these wonderful pictures which are very widely known. So such as the one on the left, the pedigree of man, this is in an English translation of his book. So you see, man is at the top of the tree of creation, and everything has preceded humans, and it makes it look like human beings were the point, that human beings were the ultimate goal or outcome of evolution. That is absolutely not Darwinian, even though, of course, it's very tempting. Instead, have a look at the drawing on the right, which is also by Haeckel, in which you see, I think, a more less human-centered, human-biased picture of the tree of life, in which there's lots and lots of different kinds branching. Of course, this is just an artistic illustration. It's not accurate. But there you see human beings are somewhere in that big bushy thing at the top right-hand corner of mammals, together with lots of other kinds. That's a more realistic picture. But we find it irresistible to think of ourselves at the top. So, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, we have all these vestigial structures. A hairless body, relatively, apparently hairless, but none of you are hairless, in fact. Unless you're undergoing chemotherapy, in which case you might be hairless. The nictitating membrane, that little pink dot in the corner of your eyes, the appendix and toenails and so forth. What are your toenails good for? Clipping? They're not good for anything. I remember when I was a child, I asked my mother, what are fingernails for? And she told me, they're there to protect the end of your finger. Okay, that seemed like a reasonable answer. And actually, I suppose it's somewhat partially correct. A more correct answer would be that, of course, we're descended from other things that had such structures on the ends of their digits. Going way back. By the way, once when I was in Malaysia, I had the pleasure of playing with a baby macaque, just like the ones we have in Singapore, Bukit Timah or wherever. Some people had a pet one, it was a baby one. It was so interesting to play with this little macaque. It was very tame and very affectionate, and to look at its little hands. They were so human-like. It had fingerprints on every finger, like mine, little swirls. It had fingernails, exactly like mine. And its little bifocal, forward-facing eyes looked into mine, and if I stopped paying attention to it and would stroke a cat that was nearby, it would sort of go, it would gesture, okay, it didn't point, but it would rub its tummy and do that. It was gesturing to me, hey, keep petting me. I've never had an animal gesture to me, oi, hey, and, for those of us who have experienced a monkey or an ape, they are very similar to us in ways that are a bit spooky. Anyway, so for Darwin and the Victorians, they were convinced that human beings were descended from earlier forms. All of these vestigial structures in our bodies clearly showed that we were not just designed on a blueprint and created as such. We had all these things in us that are not needed, like the appendix or the funny shape of our pelvis. So ladies, when you experience how should I say, when you experience childbirth, it's notoriously unpleasant and painful. Why? Because your pelvis has been compromised from a four-legged animal, right, which can have a nice broad pelvis, and squirting out offspring is no problem. But when you take the same skeleton of, like a dog or a horse or something, and you erect it up as we have been, as has happened to us, the pelvis has to narrow in order for you to walk and run, as all of you can. And this forms a serious compromise with the other things that your pelvis has to do. Hence the pain and discomfort and danger of childbirth. There's a trade-off for humans. It's not an ideal design, but I will touch on that more later. Okay, so now getting to the fossil trail itself. The first fragment that was known was discovered in 1856. And I don't want you to worry and fuss about dates in this course, even though it's a historical module. But there's one date, please remember, that 1859 is when The Origin of Species is published. Just remember that one date, please. So you should recognize this is just a bit before, but in the grand scope of things, it's really close. Okay, so it's just basically at the time when Darwin's Origin of Species hits the bookshelves and people start debating again the whole serious issue of where did this come from. So, did I tell you about, I think I actually already mentioned the pronunciation of Neanderthal, didn't I? I won't repeat that. Just don't say Neanderthal. Don't say that. Neanderthal is the pronunciation. The Neander Valley. How many of you are taking German? I know. You're taking German? Yeah. Some of you, oh, well done. I did too. I took it and then I went to Germany. I lived there for a year until I spoke German. Oh my God, it was so much fun. And then I didn't study German history after all. Anyway, you never know what's going to happen in your career. So, just a bit of skull and leg bone were found in the Neander Valley in Germany. It was obviously a human-like thing, but people were debating, what the hell is this? It didn't look, it's nice, it's, even Huxley and the other Victorians were debating, it's not a human skull, it's very, very similar, but look at those gigantic brow ridges. That's very ape-like. And from its leg bone, it was obviously something that walked up and down. So people weren't sure what this Neanderthal thing was. Some people said it was just some deformity, which is unbelievably unlikely. If the only fossil thing you find happens to be one out of a billion who's deformed. Others said, well, it's just some ape thing, but legs seem to show that it walked upright. Others said, well, it's just an ugly human. We used to live in Europe, but it's too different. So, and then others thought, I think jumping the gun, and this is so tempting for us, well, it's a human ancestor. We came from those. First there were these ape-like creatures, and then we came from them. It seemed to be the Darwinian explanation, right? Maybe. Okay, here's just a little video clip, if I can play it correctly.
The Neanderthals. They are much shorter than the other humans, and like other Ice Age animals, they have big noses to warm the air they breathe. Rather than migrate, they stay within the same valleys all year long, weathering out the worst of the winter in shallow caves. But with this recent Ice Age, their numbers have plummeted. This is now...
Of course you realize this is an actor in a costume. It's not really a Neanderthal.
An endangered species. Another animal that doesn't travel south in winter is the woolly rhino. They are very short-sighted, and this huge male has not even noticed the Neanderthal just 50 meters away. For a while, the Neanderthal doesn't notice the rhino either. Woolly rhinos are easily startled and will charge at anything that surprises them. Even at this distance, he won't see the Neanderthal, but his sense of smell is better than his sight. The rhino has picked up the scent. fortunate for the Neanderthal that his species is stronger and more heavily built than the other humans. Thick bones and a barrel chest help him deal with a very tough lifestyle.
Yes, we could all use with a bit more robustness. We now know that Neanderthals were another species. We know a lot about them now because we found lots more specimens of their bodies and also of their creations of things that they made, and apparently even burials. This is spooky. There was once another species of human. And of course today there's only one. But there used to be two. Can you imagine going around the corner and running into another one? There's all these sort of journalistic descriptions that if you shaved one of these and put them on the London Underground, or the MRT, and you sat across from one, you wouldn't notice the difference, or maybe you'd think, oh God, he's ugly. But otherwise, you wouldn't notice that it was not a human. I don't know how that is, because there's lots of reconstructions and so forth. But they were remarkably similar, but they were different. So what I said earlier about childbirth, they were much bigger and more robust, as you saw in this video clip. Well, they say they were so much bigger and more robust that Neanderthal women had no problem bearing children. They just sort of squatted down and, oh, that was it. They didn't have the same compromise because they're not so lean and narrow as Homo sapiens are. But it's even more spooky, I think, is that they made things. They had fire. They made tools. We don't know if they had language. I just can't imagine, if you could go back at any time in history, one thing I would love to see is when first Homo sapiens, us, came over a hilltop, say in Europe or the Middle East, and looked down into a valley and for the first time saw the others. Real others. These Neanderthals, these others. So, did they talk? Or, I don't know what happened. You know, were they really tough? Did they kill us? We don't know. So the fact that they could make things, and apparently, supposedly, they buried their dead, but we don't know that for sure. Some people have tried to extrapolate from that they must have had a sense of an afterlife. Again, that's a lot of extrapolation, but it's possible. What an extraordinary creature they were. And the latest, I'm reluctant to accept this, but apparently the latest DNA evidence shows that we interbred with them. I mean, I don't have a problem with interbreeding with Neanderthals, it's fine with me, if that floats your boat. But, so if you have two species that have branched off from the same ancestor, and they haven't diverged too much, they can still interbreed. And depending on how much they diverge, the interbreeding will work or not. You know, if they've diverged too much, like a horse and a donkey, then the interbreeding does not make a horse or a donkey. It makes some sterile hybrid. And apparently that may have been the case, maybe, that's my own guess, that might have been the case for humans and Neanderthals, but at least some of them were fertile. And that's why we've got Neanderthal DNA in us right now. So they're not really completely, they haven't really died out. So Neanderthals lived, they came out of, they evolved in Africa and went out into Europe and the Middle East as far as we know. They lived there for a very long time, and then we came out of Africa and the Neanderthals disappeared. Guess what happened? We don't know, but I find it utterly plausible that we killed them off. Just like we have killed off everything else when we went to a new continent or a new island. All of the amazing big things that were there, we killed them. And they're gone. It's the same in Hawaii, Australia, South America. North America, wherever you name. We go there and loads of things go extinct. So the fact that we appear at the place where the Neanderthals were and then they go extinct, not a surprise. But a lot of people don't want to accept that. They try to say, well, it's climate change or something like that. Come on, they've survived lots of climate change before. So I think we had something to do with it. That doesn't follow. It doesn't follow from that. That means that we actually sort of speared them all to death and killed them in wars and so forth. It may be that we just ate the food in the environment more efficiently than they could, or that we outbred them, or something else. It doesn't mean that we actually physically killed them off, but whatever it was, one species came into the territory and another one died out. And so Neanderthals, our closest cousins in the world, vanished about, well, less than 100,000 years ago. But the Victorians, of course, didn't know any of this. They just had these few bones, but it was extremely enticing at the time when everyone was speculating about did humans evolve or not, and suddenly these very ancient remains were found. In 1891, after Darwin's death, something really, really ancient was found, and in our own part of the world. What is now called Java Man. It was found in Java. And Wallace apparently had something to do with it. Because remember, Wallace was in favor of the idea that humans may have evolved in Asia rather than Africa. Darwin thought humans must have evolved in Africa because most of the two species they knew of great apes lived there. We now know there are three, as the Victorians did not know about the bonobo. So there's three species there rather than two. Anyway, Wallace favored Asia, and so the story goes, his influence led to this Dutch physician, Eugene de Bois, to go to what was then the Dutch East Indies, which is now Indonesia, to search for human origins. And it's unbelievable that he actually found some. He found the first fossil evidence of ancient humanoid beings, apart from the Neanderthals. He found this creature. Of course, he had a gigantic army of sort of quasi-slave labor to dig up all the hillsides, as the Indonesians had to volunteer various hours of forced labor to the Dutch government every year. So he had this gigantic army of diggers. Every time people say so-and-so discovered something, it usually means their people did, and then they take credit for it. It's the same for Wallace. Wallace had an assistant who shot a bird and brought it back, and Wallace is credited as the discoverer. Same for Dubois. So he's discredited as discovering this fossil, but actually he didn't dig it up. It doesn't matter. So you got the skull cap and the femur, leg bone, of this creature, which was obviously human-like and very, very old. Very, very ancient. But they didn't know how old it was. So it was so interesting because it was what had been expected or what might have been predicted from Darwinian principles. This was something that was obviously ape-like from its skull. More ape-like than the Neanderthal. It had a small brain, like chimps and gorillas do. It had these big brow ridges, but its legs showed that it walked on 2 feet like we do. So this very early fossil evidence showed that there were once upon a time on this planet ape things that walked around on 2 legs. They were not people, they were apes. Now remember what I said at the beginning of the lecture about how we seem so different and separate from everything else. We are. But here was something that was found in between us and all the apes that exist. Aha. Very interesting. And that was what had been predicted, or might have been expected. Well, here's another creature that was reported called Piltdown Man, which is found in a locality in England, parts of the skull and the jawbone. This caused great controversy because many people were not convinced that it was genuine. And perhaps it's not coincidental that it was found after an earlier humanoid creature had been found near Heidelberg in Germany. And in Britain we had to have our own early humanoid thing. We can't let the Germans be the first. So anyway, this creature was found, but for a long time was accepted as genuine. And even today, you will find creationist websites will go on about this Piltdown man, because eventually, in the 1950s, it was exposed as a hoax. It was a fake. This was a fake fossil. It was just a modern human skull and the jawbone of, oh dear, I've forgotten what it was. I think it's, anyway, it's the jawbone of another, I think it's an orangutan or baboon or anyway, it's not a human jawbone. So it's a manufactured specimen that was faked. We still don't know who faked it, but it was probably the man who claimed he discovered it, named Dawson. And from its purported age, this really screwed things up, because the Neanderthal, which was discovered first, and then the Java man, showed that, forget Neanderthal. The Java man showed that first these ape thingies walked upright, but they had small brains. This has a big brain, like us. So this seemed to show that big brains came early. And this really screwed things up for a time, until it was eventually exposed as a fraud. As far as I know, it's the only fraudulent one in the whole story, which is why it's dishonest of creationists or critics of evolution to try and say that the record of human evolution has been faked. Because there was one fake once, 100 years ago, which was exposed long ago. They found the skull and the teeth had been dyed in order to make them look old and so forth. It's just the same as art forgeries and many other forgeries. People are faking stuff all the time in order to sell them. In fact, I'm contacted from time to time about objects that supposedly belong to the Darwin family. Or I'm contacted, is this letter in Charles Darwin's handwriting? And it's tough. Usually I can tell instantly, no way, no, that's somebody else, I don't know who's that is, that's not Darwin's. And other times, it's a bit tricky, and you have to look very carefully at the shape of all the letters and so forth. So it's easy to create fakes, but experts can tell, eventually. There's enough scrutiny, I think. Anyway, so Piltdown Man was exposed, but it caused a mess. So other fossils kept popping up from time to time. So here's one that was found in China, Peking, called Peking Man. But this was a more complete skull of the same species as Java Man, what we now call Homo erectus, which means upright walking man. Erect man, walking man. This is an upright walking humanoid thing, but it's not a human. It's got a tiny brain like a chimp. So this contradicts that Piltdown man false corner, or false misdirection of Piltdown man. Again, it seemed to show that walking upright came before big brains did. And another was found in South Africa, also in the 1920s. This one was just a child. The fossil was that of a child. They called it the Tong child. And it was called Australopithecus afarensis, which means southern ape. Southern ape man. Now this was very old. Now human history, how far back does human history go? how long is historical time? Maybe 7,000 years at the most. Because of writing and civilization and archaeology and so forth. Maybe 7,000 years. And this has been dated as 2 to 3 million years old. This is far earlier than anything from human history. But again, it's a small ape-like creature, which you can tell from the hole in the back of the skull, how the animal held its head in life. And this animal also stood upright like us, rather than, say, like a dog or a horse, which has its head forward and the spine comes out the back. So this evidence of small brains and walking upright was appearing again and again. So clearly, what had happened in the past was that these ape creatures had started walking on 2 legs, like us, but weren't any more clever than, say, a chimpanzee. Okay, here's a family tree, which I took from a book not that long ago. This is just a snapshot from my iPhone, but it's got Piltdown Man on it. If you look at the top right corner, there's this branch sticking out, Piltdown Man. This is from a book from 1931. This is basically the last time that faked fossil had any appearance in scientific literature. But what you can see from this is that it sticks out. It doesn't fit with all the other evidence that had accumulated by the 1930s about human evolution. Piltdown Man stuck out. And so it was depicted here as an unusual offshoot from the human evolutionary tree as they then understood it. Okay, before we continue, let's take your 5-minute break. Over the years, more and more things were turning up. So in 1960, this creature, which was called Homo habilis, which basically means handyman, a man who could use his hands, use your imagination on that one, found in Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, which was dated to be about 1.75 million years ago. So that's half the age of the earlier Homo erectus that had already been found in Java and China, and by that time in other places. And the most famous of them all, I'm not really sure why, is this fossil, this specimen, this particular individual called Lucy, named by the discoverers from a Beatles song that was playing on the radio in the evening when they found the fossil. It was a female. It was a female creature, but it was very old, over 3 million years old. And it's now called, the species is Australopithecus afarensis. Now, because of the remarkable completeness of this ancient fossil, that's probably the main reason why it's so famous and so special, because we have so much of its skeleton. This filled in a lot of the picture. Early, upright walking ape creatures with small brains. But very human looking, but not human. They're apes. And tantalizingly, wonderfully, more evidence was found from exactly the same time period as this fossil. Something else was found at Laetoli in Tanzania. Fossil footprints. Fossilized footprints. Look at them on the slide. They look just like human footprints on the beach, but they are not human footprints. They are from an Australopithecus afarensis. They are from the same species as Lucy. In fact, they could even be from Lucy herself. We don't know, but anyway, they're from the same time as this Lucy creature used to walk around. What happened was that there was a volcano erupting in the countryside near here, and the fresh, soft, ashy mud deposits were soft, and the footprints that were left by, not only by these cave creatures, but by other animals that walked in it, were preserved. It's an unusual thing, but of course, over the course of the history of the world, we have lots of preserved footprints from all different periods of the history of the Earth. So they do occasionally turn up. Anyway, there could be no less unambiguous evidence that these early ape creatures walked bipedally like we do. Because you can study the gait from the footprints. You can see how they walked. You can see where the heel hit the ground. In fact, I think I'm repeating what's going to be shown to you in the video clips. They also showed there are lots and lots and lots of reconstructions of this fossil footprint trackway. They show two individuals' foot tracks walking side by side. One individual is bigger than the other. So we tend to interpret that as a male and a female, but there have just been two ladies, one who was bigger, we don't know. And a smaller track of footprints was following behind them, which partly walks over them, which looks to be a child. So it's very plausible that it was a father and a mother and a child. Australopithecines, not humans. But what could be more creepily human than something that walks along the landscape on two legs like us? That's very spooky indeed. So here's two more depictions of these. Not very pretty, are they? Anyway, those are the reconstructions of what Australopithecines would have looked like. So Lucy was an Australopithecine, and that's what these are meant to be. So these are apes that walked on two legs. And by now, we have lots and lots of specimens of them, lots of their bones, and we even have their footprints. Why is it getting so noisy? We have lots and lots of their evidence of their existence and even of their behavior. So now here are two animations. I think I've mentioned this series before. It's kind of old now, but I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or wherever. Walking with Beasts. It was a sequel to the hugely successful Walking with Dinosaurs, but it's not so sexy, Walking with Beasts. Not that many people know about it, but I do recommend it to you because it shows a lot of snapshots from the history of life on Earth that are usually skipped, that are less well known. Particularly that bizarre world of South America that was on its own. Anyway, they cover these creatures. Oops, turn the mic on. What is going on? Why is there so much chatting? What's the rain? Somebody tell the rain to stop. I'm sorry. I said this murmur, it was so loud. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Now pay attention.
A type of ape has evolved that clearly shows the first signs of becoming more human. What makes them closer to us than other apes is not their brains, which are only 1/3 of the size. It's not their skin, which is hairy. It's something they do that other apes just don't. something that will one day lead them to be described as a missing link. These apes walk upright. These are Australopithecus. Go back 200,000 generations and your relatives would look something like this. They live in groups with complex social structures and are also very political animals.
Okay, the animators who made this series, I think, didn't do a very good job, because they showed those creatures, as you see in that clip and in the next one, walking sort of artificially and a bit awkwardly. That's wrong. That doesn't work anatomically. Also, when you see very old pictures of human evolution, you sort of see this sort of supposedly halfway stage of these sort of cavemen walking like this. No one ever walked like that. It doesn't work. They would break their backs. There was no such face, even though at one time people thought that such a thing existed, and these animators who are not expert paleontologists, they got it a bit wrong. They sort of funky walking thing. No, they walked, as we know from the footprints, they walked just like us. From the pelvis and the legs and so forth. It only works like this, which is why those creatures would have been so spooky if you could have seen them. I mean, it would have just made your skin crawl. God, they look so human, but it's just an ape. Right? If you saw such a creature, it would really freak you out. Okay, I recognize it's not rain. Okay. Step number 2. See, they got the gate slightly wrong.
Two legs is an efficient way to travel and gives the Australopithecus a higher viewpoint than other apes. This means predators are easier to spot. Out here in the open, they must be especially vigilant. The group also means to stick together. 8 pairs of eyes are better than 1.
This awkward walking where their backs, where their backs are not quite upright and they're swinging a bit too much. The animators just got that wrong. In fact, maybe they would have been better off just to have people in costumes like they did with the Neanderthal, because they would get the walking right. The gait, the way they walked, would have been exactly the same, and they've not got that right. But anyway, the reason I cut this out, the reason I like this sequence, when they pan out from a distance, and you can't really see them that exactly, they really look like just a group of people walking there. And that part I find quite spooky. That's what it would have been like if they were not extinct. If we could see them walking around today, it would be the most eerie thing you've ever seen. To see things walking around on 2 legs like us, that weren't human, that would be, well, bizarre. But, so, despite this false turn of the Piltdown man, which kind of slowed things down a little bit, it was obvious that walking upright on 2 legs came first, not big brains. It wasn't that these ape things got really clever and decided, hey, let's walk on 2 legs. It was the opposite. Walking on 2 legs came first, and big brains and cleverness came much later, much later. So, why? There have been endless theories for this. One is the hunting theory that it was these creatures began to walk on two legs rather than knuckle walking, which is what if you've ever seen chimpanzees, they walk on their hind legs but assisted by their arms and with their fingers curled up. It's called knuckle walking. So why did these creatures walk on two legs? Well, maybe it was to help them run, because we can run really fast compared to any knuckle walker, much faster. The other one mentioned in that video clip was to see farther over a new environment, which was grasslands rather than forests. And by standing on two legs, you can obviously see really, really far. Another theory was that it was to free the hands to carry things or do things with hands, to carry babies or food or other things. And one of the most eccentric is the aquatic ape theory. Right on cue. The aquatic ape theory doesn't get much time usually because it's not very respectable. In fact, the only respectable person who will ever mention it, I think, is David Attenborough himself. The aquatic ape theory, which isn't dead yet, but it's not very well supported, it is interesting, is that the reason that we walk on two legs is that our ancestors went through a phase of living on the water's edge and spending a lot of time in the water. There are actually quite a few things that sort of fit with this theory, or supposedly do. So, for example, it's also claimed that these apes that lived a lot of their time in the water had to walk. Not only did they take walking to two legs so that they could wade in water better and maybe gather food or whatever and carry their babies, but that this supposedly explains the loss of body hair to walk through the water. The other one is what I think it's called drown-proofing in babies. You've probably heard of this, that if you take a newborn baby and you drop them in, or put them in water, they won't drown. And there are lots of famous pictures of babies in swimming pools and so forth, underwater. They're fine. They're not distressed. They don't drown. Why do they have this instinct to hold their breath? Some people say it's because of this aquatic ape origin. Other people say it's simply a leftover from having been in the womb when surrounded by fluid they didn't breathe. I don't know. I don't know the answer. But it's interesting. And there are a few other things that are attributed to this aquatic, this purported aquatic past. Another theory is that upright walking actually began in the trees. Now this is interesting. Because this is a newer theory. Most of the older ones were that these ape creatures came down to the forest floor, weren't climbing around the trees anymore, and perhaps had to go out in the, left the forest, as there was a period of drying out, and had to cross long grassy plains between bits of forest, and hence walking upright on two legs is better. It is more efficient over longer distances to travel on two legs than four. It may not be a cause, that just may be a happy accident. But it turns out that there may have been a reason to start walking on two legs, as we do, while still in the trees. One biologist, or perhaps more, has studied orangutans and how they move through the trees, and has found that they spend a good proportion of their time, they spend moving on their hind legs, walking on the tree branches and perhaps just assisting themselves with the hand. So that walking on two legs may have begun before these creatures came down to walk on the land. I don't know if anybody will ever figure it out. It's hard to know why these creatures started walking on two legs. Okay, here's the next clip.
Have been made here at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania than anywhere else in the world. Perhaps here we can find clues as to why our ancestors took such a different path.
3.5 million years ago, the volcano behind me was belching out ash which covered the entire landscape. And it was in that ash that the most evocative discovery of all was made.
These are the fossilized tracks of ancient rhino and antelope here at Laetone in Tanzania, and among them are the footprints of an ape. A very remarkable ape.
Scientists maintain that they can deduce from the shape of bones the posture of the living animal, but there will always be arguments. Here, however, is proof positive that 3.5 million years ago, mankind's ancestors were walking on 2 feet upright. Here's the dent made by the heel as it hit the ground, the raised instep, and the big toe, instead of pointing outwards from the foot, as is needed if you're going to climb trees, is lying forward to give the final push-off. But the exciting thing about Laetone is that there is a whole trackway of prints, and they have fossilized behavior and revealed family life in a way that is almost disturbingly familiar.
2 individuals, one slightly larger than the other, perhaps male and female, appear to have been walking beside one another, maybe even arm in arm. The male's footprints are scuffed by a smaller set of prints, perhaps made by a child, walking through the newly fallen volcanic ash and treading in the steps of its father.
The big question, of course, is why did they stand upright? There have been a number of suggestions. One is that it was to get a better view of the surroundings, to spot for danger or for prey. Maybe it was to release the hands, to use tools, or pick up food, or hold a baby. And there's a third, rather more controversial suggestion.
About 6 million years ago, the climate of the Earth became very erratic. The great African forests began to die back. The blanket of trees became broken by patches of scrub and grassland. There's some evidence, too, that slow movements in the Earth's crust caused areas of East Africa to flood. A new habitat had appeared for the apes.
Using their long, chimp-like arms, these early creatures were still climbing trees in order to find their food. But as the forests diminished, so they had to travel farther from one tree to the next. And that involved crossing open spaces covered with grass or even water. And to do that, they traveled upright on 2 feet, as I'm doing.
Suddenly, an image from our remote past comes vividly to life. The time when our distant ancestors, in order to keep up with the changing environment, had to wade and keep their heads above water in order to float. That crucial moment when our far distant ancestors took a step away from being apes and a step towards humanity. Apes are primarily adapted for a life in the trees, which is why they waddle if they try to walk upright. It's tiring for them to stand on 2 feet for any length of time. But when they wade, the water supports their bodies and takes some of the strain off their leg muscles so that they can stay upright for much longer. Maybe a life at the water's edge encouraged anatomical change. At about this time, the hip bones of these early ape men altered, and our ancestors adopted an upright existence.
Well, as I said, Sir David is more sympathetic to the aquatic ape theory than most people are. It's quite controversial, and so I mean, some chimps wading is just chimps wading. It doesn't actually prove anything, but who knows? That may have had something to do with it. But we know from the fossils that these ape creatures went from a tree-dwelling, knuckle-walking anatomy to an upright one quite quickly. It happened quite rapidly, and that's because there really is no halfway stage in which creatures walked around like this. They had, or like this. It just doesn't work. Walking upright had to have happened quite rapidly. There must have been some reason why it was advantageous to do so. So, I've been stressing so far the fact that walking on two legs, bipedalism, came first, and very long time ago, more than 3 million years ago. But after that came the thing that most of us are interested in, or keen on anyway, is the intelligence of human-like things. So here's a couple of tips on this.
Then it should be that brain size in primates corresponds closely to group size. This is the skull of a baboon, and this double plasticine represents the brain which the skull once contained. This represents the brain of a bush baby. It's essentially a solitary animal, but even alive for its small body size, its brain is tiny. This, slightly larger, is the brain of a colobus. Group size, 15. This, bigger still, a guenon. Group size, 25. And back to our baboon, group size, 50. In fact, the relationship is so close that were you to give a skull to a researcher who worked with monkeys, even though they didn't know what kind of monkey it belonged to, they would be able to accurately predict the size of group in which it lived.
Miles away, in the highlands of Ethiopia, live the largest monkey groups of all. Giraffes, the world's only grazing monkeys. There's a lot of grass up here, and so giraffes flourish and gather into enormous herds. They don't have nipping teeth like sheep or rabbits, so they have to collect their grass by hand. This is done best by sitting down, and giraffes spend much of their lives shuffling along on their backsides. Because they're sitting down for so much of the time, their sexual displays have moved to their chests, where other giraffes can see them. These give an instant indication of strength and virility and allow individuals to assess each other's status at a glance, so avoiding unnecessary confrontations. Within these herds are smaller groups, like those formed by other monkeys. Related females constitute the core, with a male harem leader who watches over them, and he has to be very vigilant. A pack of bachelor males with one goal in mind: to displace the holder of the harem. The bachelors avoid males with the brightest chests. They are in their prime and will have the full support of their family. But less impressive males will have to prove their worth in battle. A lip flip from one of the bachelors is a threat. Flip answers flip. There's going to be trouble. but they do waste valuable grazing time. Eating grass is very time-consuming, also occupies your hands, which makes it very hard to find enough time for grooming. So geladas maintain their friendships in another way. They chatter to one another.
Oh, they got cut off and they're chattering. They're afraid the chattering continues here.
And also occupies your hands, which makes it very hard to find enough time for grooming. So geladas maintain their friendships in another way. They chatter to one another. These noises are, in effect, vocal grooming, and enable geladas to communicate with many individuals at the same time. And this is the secret of their ability to live in huge groups. Their continuous chatter sounds like a language, but we have no idea what sort of information they're exchanging. One thing, however, is likely. It was the need to communicate detailed social information between many individuals that led to the evolution of language in our own species.
So, although monkeys living in the treetops have rich and varied lives, it's the ones that came down to the ground and formed large groups that have the most complex and communicative societies of all. A fact not without significance for our own ancestry.
So, when you see...
And also occupies your hand. It was the need.
When you see these large groups of monkeys chattering to each other, and perhaps gossiping or whatever it is they're doing, the correlation is very interesting between brain size and social group size. As David noted in the early part of the clip, that in fact there is a direct correlation between brain size and the group size of different primates. We are also primates. We have the biggest brains, and we live in the biggest groups. So the reasoning is it probably has something to do with it. And the reason we are so big-brained and so clever is that it has something to do with living in a large group size, that we have to keep track of each other. It takes a lot of intelligence to keep track of lots of other clever apes around you. After all, you have to keep track of all the gossip around you, who's sitting what behind your back, who you really fancy but you don't want to reveal it, and who you think has it out for you, who your enemies might be, who you find out. There's endless details, as indeed historians will one day discover when they dig up all your WhatsApp chats. So the historical evidence will one day come out of your gossip and so forth. Anyway, the amount of information that I'm tempted to say waste, the amount of information that we generate on gossip and social relations and so forth is massive. And the scene where the camera pans back and you see this vast array of monkeys just sort of chattering. It sounds like humans from a distance. If you saw a crowd scene from a distance, it's also this. And we're basically doing the same thing. Stand back and look at us from outside, from a distance, and we look very similar, don't we? Go and look at the next time you're at the, I don't know, the canteen or the Hawker Center or wherever it is, and just look at people from a distance and see what they're doing. They're standing around, chatting, maybe arguing or whatever. Maybe they're not doing the lip flip, but you know, they're doing these social things with our big brains, which came. So what we know from the fossil evidence is that there were for millions of years, these apes, which walked on two legs, that was stupid. Okay, I'm being a bit rude, but they were chimp level clever. Actually, that's very rude, because chimps aren't stupid. They're actually very clever compared to everything else in the world. Right, so there were these chimp level cleverness apes, just apes, walking on two legs for millions of years in small groups in Africa. And then some of them started to get very big brains indeed. So, what in the time of Darwin and the generations after him was a non-existent fossil record, eventually became, as it is today, a very extensive fossil record. Instead of us being an isolated species that's not connected to anything else, we now know where we fit in very, very well indeed, because the other things in this bush of upright walking apes are dead. That makes us look more isolated than we are. If those other things were around, we wouldn't think of ourselves as any more different than if we were one species of squirrel. Right? I said at the beginning, a squirrel is not special because there's different kinds of squirrels all over the place. Right? But we seem so separate and so different. The reason we seem so separate and different, one of the reasons, is that there's nothing else around that walks on two legs. Except for birds and kangaroos. But I mean, there's no other primates that walk around on two legs, or that is clever, or that is anyway approaches us. So we seem more distant because there's been a lot of extinction in this group of animals. Particularly with the Neanderthals, they were the last ones, the last others. Anyway, so this is a modern reconstruction of the human family. So they're not all these. Now, compare this kind of view, which reconstructs from the fossil evidence that we have this branching tree. Many of these, branch off and are dead ends, exactly like all other families of animals. Not everything happens to lead to this particular species that we are. That's what's wrong with that Ernst Haeckel drawing I showed you at the beginning, human beings at the pinnacle. It makes it sound like there was this step-by-step process leading to humans. And that's just not true. That's not what the evidence shows, and that's not how evolution tends to work. Instead, there's lots of diversification with different species adapting to different places, or perhaps getting separated off into different environments and evolving off in their own direction in isolation, and sometimes dying off. In our own case, it's probably not a coincidence that we are so damn clever and so bloody dangerous. I mean, we are the most dangerous killer on Earth. Right? There's nothing more dangerous. Well, you're afraid of running into a tiger or snake? No way. The most dangerous thing you can run into is a human. We are really scary. We are dangerous. Right? When you see a scary movie, the most dangerous thing is either some human baddie chasing someone down trying to kill them, or a ghost. Okay, ghosts are scary too because they can run through walls and stuff. But other than that, you don't spend the whole movie being chased by a crocodile or a snake. They're just not that scary. But humans, they're nasty. They can keep on going. They keep chasing you because they're clever. They're as clever as you are. They are the most dangerous animal on Earth. So perhaps we should not be surprised that this super clever species is so alone. That those that most closely compete with it are dead. Maybe it's not a coincidence. We killed them all. Or we outbred them. I mean, there are other possibilities. So here's another graphical representation representing this process of the upright walking apes for hominids. That branch off on the left floresiensis is the latest one to be discovered. And to be frank, that one is pretty freaky. Have you heard of this one? It's been nicknamed the Hobbit. Have you heard of this? It was discovered in the island of Flores in Indonesia, and it was from the bones. It's a really, really small hominid species. Like that. They're really tiny, and nobody's yet really figured out who the hell were they? How did they get to Indonesia? Because we haven't found their bones anywhere else. Some people think that maybe they branched off from Homo erectus, because Homo erectus was all the way to China, and Java. So maybe they got out to Flores, and on this island eventually evolved a smaller body and became hobbits. We don't know, but this is the latest creature to be discovered. They also didn't die out that long ago, so there used to be, just imagine this, there used to be other things running around on two legs like us. Neanderthals, hobbits, elves, orcs, lots of things. But alas, they're all gone. So, but anyway, the evidence is absolutely unambiguous on this point. Where did this group of animals evolve? In Africa, as Darwin predicted, based on the fact that there were more species of apes there than anywhere else. So these upright walking ape things evolved in Africa, and they were so successful that they left, the population numbers swelled, and that they migrated, or they moved, invaded other regions of the world. That's not to say that they went from Africa and left and went somewhere else. I mean, they were still in Africa, but they were so numerous that they colonized other parts of the globe. And so Homo erectus went to other parts of the world, lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and eventually died out. We came out of Africa too, but separately, on our own. We were the last one to come out of Africa, 100 or 250,000 years ago or so. And so that is our last point of common origin, that all of us, the so-called races of humans, have only been separated by that maximum, that amount of time. So as I've mentioned several times in this module, races are biological varieties, local versions of one species. The earliest ones went out, and then there was wave after wave of reconquest and recolonization. So I think there's probably no people in the world who can say that they are the original inhabitants of some place, except for the Australians and the New Zealanders, okay, and the Polynesians. But there are not many others, because there have been so many conquests and reconquests and reconquests and waves of invaders. I mean, in Britain, it's unbelievably complicated. Some people used to think that the Celts were the original inhabitants. No way. They were later invaders. The original inhabitants, they go back tens of thousands of years, and we don't really know who they were. Although recently, someone found the remains of some ancient caveman and took the DNA, and they actually found a direct descendant living within 10 miles away, which is not very encouraging for some of us, that you don't end up that far away from your ancestors. So the same with the part of the world that we live in. The peoples who originally colonized this part of the world are long gone. They've been replaced over and over again. So as far as I know, the peoples like the Orang Aslis in Malaysia, they are perhaps similar to the earliest human inhabitants, like those who ended up in Australia, New Guinea, and so forth. Anyway, so the old-fashioned idea that human races are different species is, of course, a complete misunderstanding and mistake. There's only one human species. They're just different local varieties. And this is what we know about the distribution of humans out of Africa and the timeline as we currently understand it. So the earliest places to be colonized or occupied by ancient humans are, of course, those closest to Africa. Australia, maybe within 50,000 years ago. New Zealand, only 1,500 years ago. Because that was a very late place to be reached by humans. And so the wonderful exotic animals that lived there were some of the last to be killed off by us, unfortunately. Like the giant birds. So, this kind of stereotypical picture of evolution, I want you, from now on, whenever you see pictures like this, I want you to shake your head and go, roll your eyes, oh, that's a superficial caricature of evolution. That is not a realistic picture. There is no this direct lineage. Oh, and see number 2 and 3 there, right? They're doing that sort of funky walking, which never happened. These are just artistic impressions that are not realistic, and they give a very false impression. So what we have instead is a family tree that we understand now very well, based on DNA and other evidence. This particular chimpanzee on the top right I find really freaky because he's lost his hair. And he looks rather, human-like. Okay, a very common question is, are we still evolving? There's a problem with that question because it embodies a slight misunderstanding. And it also uses the word, it's assuming the word evolution in two different senses. Often when people mean something evolved, they mean some big structure like wings or the long neck of a giraffe or something like that, some major big change. But such things take a really long time to evolve. So if you were to go in the middle of the history of the evolution of a wing or a long-necked giraffe and say, is the giraffe still evolving? You would just see some animal running around, like all the others, for hundreds of years. They all look the same. It would be a meaningless question, because it's one that assumes there is a direction in evolution, which there isn't. It assumes that things are heading in some direction or somewhere. They're not. So that's a false assumption. On the other hand, evolution is the only game in town. So there is no in or out. That's just the way life works. So to say, are we still evolving, even David Attenborough's got this one wrong. He's actually appeared in the media saying that we are not evolving. That's just wrong. There's no such thing as not evolving. We're just here. We're animals, we make babies, and life goes on. That's the only game in town. There's no such thing as not evolving. It's a false expectation based on are we undergoing some big change? But that is a very limited view of what evolution is. It's not just undergoing big changes. So lots of things have been happening to us in the recent past. Our skin colors have changed in the very recent past. The differential adaptation to dairy products, especially in the Western world, more people are adapted to digest dairy products as adults, which is an unnatural, bizarre thing to do, because only babies should be able to digest milk in mammals. Less Asian peoples are able to digest them as adults because of the different heritage of keeping grazing animals. Blue eyes have evolved very recently. I mentioned before that wisdom teeth are gradually disappearing. The resistance to various diseases is constantly changing. Ebola. Guess what? People who are susceptible to Ebola, who live where Ebola is, they're dead. And those who are naturally immune, they survive. That's evolution. Somebody runs across the street and doesn't get hit by a bus, that's natural selection too. They survive. Somebody whose balance or vision is not so good and they run across and they do get hit by the bus, that's natural selection too. They're dead. They are naturally selected out of the gene pool. Okay, one last step.
Have shown shown us something else. It's not just that chimpanzees are capable of developing their own techniques for hunting or tool making, but that each community of chimps is capable of developing its own version. In other words, chimpanzees communities have their own cultures, and that was thought to be something that was uniquely human. Everyone knew, of course, that chimps are our biological cousins, but it's only in the last 20 years that we've discovered that we share about 95% of our DNA with them. And that's because we now have the tools to find out exactly how closely we are all related. In 1990, scientists in 20 labs around the world set out to identify all the 3,000 million separate chemical units that make up the human genetic code. It took nearly 13 years, and then exactly 50 years after Crick and Watson had worked out the structure of DNA, the human genome was cracked. And this is it. In these volumes is all the information needed to define the genetic structure of the human species. Each number refers to one of our 23 chromosomes. If I open it up, you can see that the text consists of just one very, very, very long list of just 4 letters, A, C, D, G. Each combination represents instructions for one element in the human design. This is the secret language of DNA. This is the book of life. And each one of us has our own edition.
Okay, I'll stop the clip early because, as I'm sure you've all noticed, I've gone 5 minutes over. Closing message for this lecture is that over the last 150 years, we went from having no evidence of human evolution, no ancestry, no picture of what had happened before us, apart from what could be derived from actual structure and so forth today, to what is now one of the best records of fossils for any species on Earth. We have an outstanding record. We are no longer separated as we once appeared to be, because we have a whole bush of upright walking primates, many of which left no descendants who died out, one lineage of which led to us. The record is very complete. So if you hear anyone talking about there being a missing link, they don't know what they're talking about. There isn't any. We have loads. So the record is now very complete indeed, and it's very interesting to see how lengthy our lineage is and where we come from. So speculate on that further. That's it for today.